Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. This is today another Tea, Coffee and Code in the Spring Series. We can call this the Spring Series. I'm not sure what we finally agreed on. As you may have noticed from my British accent, I'm not actually Jim. Jim is around in the background. He's had a little bit of a situation go on, so he can't make it today, but he's okay. It's just you can put up with me for a little while. Today we've got a number of people joining us who I'll introduce in a moment. There is a webcam view, so if you want to see what we look like and laugh when we drop things and people walk in the background and do various things like that, you can look at the webcam view as well. And we've got some slides to discuss the subject as well. Today's Tea, Coffee and Code is Data ETL. That is specifically extract, transform, and load. So we'll start off with the standard disclaimer. If anybody's got any questions, please type them into the little questions box that GoToWebinar provides, and we'll try and answer them as we go along. But if we start off with the warranty disclaimer, so the lawyers are happy and have made their money. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed belong solely to the individual panelists and not necessarily to the other panelists, their employers, organizations, committees, or other groups or individuals. The opinions and advice given are just that, free advice, and should be viewed as a suggestion for doing your own research, arriving at your own conclusions. The field is rapidly changing, and details may already be outdated. In a group discussion, generalizations are made that may or may not apply to your specific situation. A professional assessment should be conducted in order to right-size any professional guidance to your exact situation or conditions. No warranty is created, no liability is assumed, and no legal advice is offered. Spoken like a true lawyer. Okay, we've got some upcoming Tea, Coffee and Code sessions. Some of these may move around. We've got a few scheduling things going on, but the next one up for Wednesday, 2nd of June is an integrations one, combining scripts and native code. 9th of June, 16th of June, 23rd of June, 30th of June, and 7th of July. If you've subscribed already, and presumably if you're here, you have subscribed, then you automatically will get notified of these sessions as well. We'll try and publicize them as much as possible. They're on the blogs.embarcadero.com. You'll probably get some emails from us and a few other things as well. But if you haven't subscribed and you've only subscribed to one, you need to come along to all of them. They last roughly 2 hours, and we try and make them around about a lunchtime in the US and probably just at going home time in the UK and Europe and a few places like that. It's a general discussion, and we try and invite a number of different panelists. And today we've got 4 people. We have Kelvin Milotti, Miguel Marina, myself, and Olaf Monja. If we first of all talk about Kelvin Milotti. Kelvin is an Embarcadero MVP since 2014. He's a regional coordinator for Brazil. And I like the fact that he put this in. He said developer for Delphi since 2001 and a speaker since 2009. Lead product architect at Educe. Is that space project? I feel inadequate already. And a writer since 2004 for magazines and blogs. You can find him at K Milotti at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, on YouTube as well, and at his website, Kelvin Milotti. Hello, Kelvin.
Hello, everybody. Hope everyone is feeling great today. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk a little bit about ETL. That is something use it in our daily development, and I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. Next person up as well is Miguel Marina. Miguel is a Embarcadero MVP since 2014. He's an electrical engineer and designer of embedded systems, IoT solutions. So it's his fault that the world is going to be connected by all sorts of crazy equipment that doesn't work until you say something wrong and it works when you don't want it to. Signal, power, and integration modules and PCBs. He's a software developer, of course, in Delphi, C++ assembler. So you know he's good. Right? And Python, and is that MicroPython as well. Yeah, looks like it.
That is correct.
Aha, I guessed well. He developed with Turbo, Pascal, C++, like many of us, and Delphi since 1988. Consultant and a trainer. His website is www.delphiguru.net, and you can email him at miguel@delphiguru.net. Hello, Miguel.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Ian.
Oh, there he is. Sorry about that. Slight satellite delay. Is that what it is? Myself, I'm sure you've bumped into me a few times. I seem to be everywhere at the moment. I'm a prolific British-American software developer, designer, narrator, poet. If you really like poetry, I'll point you in the right direction. And an Embarcadero Delphi MVP. I was born in London, England, and I now live in Dallas, which is why I'm a little bit sweaty because it's quite hot and humid here today. I do claim that Delphi is my superpower, and I'm not kidding. I think that the only reason I get any work done whatsoever is pretty much because Delphi makes life very easy for me. You can find me on the web at about.me/Ian Barker. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I come up with all sorts of nonsense. That's at punctuation. You look for some check digits and you'll find me. Olaf Monyen is the owner and CEO of Developer Experts LLC USA. I'm not going to attempt to say that very long ago. I'll let Olaf say it in a moment. But he is in Germany, has offices in Germany and the USA. He also is an Embarcadero MVP, and I think we all are actually, if I'm correct today, all of us are MVPs. He's a coordinator for the DACH region. He's contributed towards the excellent Indie, which I'm sure most of you have come across from time to time, the Intraweb, which is also a great library. In fact, I was writing something with it today, the REST client library, and the BAAS components. You can email him on olaf@monyen.net. You can also go to his website at www.developer-experts.net/blog. Follow him on Twitter, where we all are, at omonyen, and LinkedIn as well, if you're crazy enough to use LinkedIn like myself and Olaf. It's linkedin.com/in/Olaf Monyen. Hello, Olaf.
Hey, Ian, how are you?
I'm fine. How on earth do you say that German name? Because I would need an operation on my tongue.
Well, to be honest, it's more or less, well, something like a consultancy. So it's in German, it's Unternehmensberatung Monin. Basically means I'm consulting, offering consulting services. So it's just the word for the German market, but most people know me under Developer Experts. So for legal reasons, we have two companies here, and that's pretty much it. So today, ETL, the acronym that probably many users didn't even know, but it's all about data. Getting data, scrambling data, and pushing back data to somewhere. That's pretty much what we are going to talk about today. And I'm trying to contribute a little bit, and well, let's see where we are going.
Exactly. So today's discussion topics amongst all of us is going to be, we're going to go into more detail, but what is ETL? We're going to talk about FireDAC in particular as well, because FireDAC is a great library and does a lot of very clever things to do with virtually every kind of database or data source or memory sources and everything else that you could use. I'm sure of the attendees that are listening to this, most of you have used FireDAC. If you haven't used FireDAC, you will eventually, but it just comes across. Yeah, you know, in most code that you use, sooner or later, FireDAC will turn up. We're going to talk about the text writer, JSON, and some cross-platform challenges to do with things like FireDAC, text encoding, because that's more of a problem in today's world. Back in the early 90s, it wasn't really a problem. It was either you're on a mainframe using EBCDIC or something like that, or you worried about ANSI and ASCII. And nowadays, there's all sorts of things like UTF-8, UTF-16, and many, many other things. And data pump tools. So I don't want to talk too much, but if we just get me to describe this particular screen, what is ETL? Well, as Olaf said, it is an acronym for extract, transform, and load. And that's as simple as that. It's the general procedure of copying data from one or more sources into a destination system, which represents the data differently from the sources or in a different context from the other sources. So in other words, it's taking something from one place, converting it, and using it in another place. It's the most basic level. That's really what it is. And that could be data from a database. It could be some kind of REST service or something like that, where you're converting the data. It could even be something like WebSocket data or sent as JSON and then converting that into something else, representation and saving. It can include encoding or decoding the data and text formats like JSON, XML, CSV.
It could be SAP data, could be Salesforce data, all those things that you might have in your enterprise, and the boss told you to extract the data and process it in some way and produce KPIs, another acronym, and just put it somewhere. So just everything which is somehow data. It's not bound to databases, which is quite important to know. And I think it's not a standard or something. There is no standard procedure how to do ETL. No, it's not. It's just an acronym, and that's all.
Yeah, there's no ETL police, and there is no ISO ETL standard, exactly. And that's the thing there. Not yet, anyway. I mean, give the European government time, and they'll come up with a set of rules about it, I'm sure. But and now we've mentioned it publicly on air, there will be a committee already forming as we speak in Brussels to do that. And not that the UK will notice, but there you go. So yes, I mean, I agree. When I was asked about this originally, because I've been doing some blog articles to do with ETL, I had to think about it and think, well, what exactly am I going to write about this? Because really, it's everything that you do as a programmer. You know, really 90% of what you're doing as a programmer is taking something and representing it as something. And it does link with some of the other topics we talked about, like visualization as well. We showed Steamer's very good T-chart visualization, where they took all these statistics around the world and extracted the statistics, combined them together with SQL and stuff like that. So yeah.
I took a couple of slides of previous presentations I have done in Code Gears, which having all of them focus on ETL. So I just took the most significant ones for the sake of unifying the concepts for the people, for our attendants. So if you don't mind, I'll just do on these couple of slides. What I was trying to...
Sorry, do you want me to make you presenter, or shall I just change the slide? Are these the slides that we have up at the moment?
I think we shouldn't touch anything. I'll prefer you change the slides for me.
I have you on the back foot now. I like that. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll hand over to you. Just say next slide when you're ready, and I'll click. For anybody that's just joined us, sorry about that. The GoToWebinar dumped on us in the middle, and we're back in full force now. So
yeah, I wouldn't dare to touch anything now that everything is up and running. Okay. All right. So what I was trying to show here is that systems integration is a word that is misleading for many people, but it's pretty simple. Is that when you need to move data between different systems. It's so simple. And now, what I have seen, this is not official theory. This is just a category that I took the liberty to come up with based on the experience and the projects I've been working with in the past. Is overall, I can see three types of system integration models, or types, or scenarios, whatever you want to call them. So in one of them, you have pure data transfer and interface model. So you are really actually dynamically moving data back and forth between 1, 2, 3, or more systems. In the second model or scenario is a data warehouse. Is you have a single repository that's taking everything and being fed from all the other subsystems. And the third model, which is implicitly always there, but we may not realize about it, is the reporting system model, where you have some reporting system, either commercial, built by your own, or company developed, and then data, in order to make a report, is grabbing the data from everywhere. It may not come to your mind that it's actually integrating data from other systems, because it might be proprietary, especially with the commercial solutions, but actually they have to do data integration. It's doing data transfer back and forth. Could you please go to the next slide, Ian? So very simple. Again, the first model, the data transfer and interface. You have data, real data being dynamically being transferred from systems. This is nowadays more common than it used to be in the past. In the past, we had silos of data. It was very common to have like a payroll system totally separate from the production system and totally separate from the accounting system. And the data was still being fed into these systems, but guess what? It was manually being fed. In other words, you would run a report out of one of the systems, hand it over to the clerk or person in charge of the other system, and then manually input that data again. So the transfer has always been there. The point is that it wasn't necessarily being automated. It was done or manually being taken care of. But this need of integrating systems has always been there. In most recent times, we see many commercial solutions that try to address this issue. So they provide you microservices, portals, or files. So they give you the fabric, the infrastructure, in order to make it easier to integrate systems. Now, what I have seen is that most of these systems are aimed for the corporate market, where they do have real big systems that are separated from each other. So most of these solutions tend to be fairly expensive. Next slide, please. And now going to the second scenario, the data warehouse. This might be the most common for everybody attending this session now, because most of us seems to understand what is a data warehouse model. Actually, when you call a database a warehouse, it's because it's the main repository of any other subsystem in a company. Some are not called specifically warehouse, but this happens in a company when you have the sales department has a small database, maybe coming from our own times, could be a simple database sitting in a single workstation by a single program that you custom wrote for them. That is a database, a subsystem with a specific kind of data being called locally in a machine. It doesn't matter. It's a subsystem that later, maybe you had a small batch routine that at the end of the day would feed it back to the main database of the company. Then that main database of the company is a warehouse following this nomenclature that we are highlighting right here. In other words, is the one that holds all the data from all these subsystems around the company. Now, in a real so-called officially data warehouse, you're talking about real robust databases, mostly SQL Server, Oracle, Sybase, IBM, whatever, that are truly designed to be warehouses. And what makes them be called warehouse is that they are designed with a huge storage capacity. They have been fine-tuned and optimized to have quick access to lots of historic data. Any of you that have been working with huge databases knows that there's an impact on performance as the data grows big and big and big. So when you do see a database that has been tagged officially as warehouse, is because it has been specifically designed, put together, configured, you name it, to really handle a huge amount of data. But again, even the simple master database in your company that is not tagged as warehouse, but is collecting data from all other subsystems is a warehouse, meaning it's the one that is collecting from all the other subsystems. Next slide, please. And last but not least, the data reporting system. All systems that make reports are actually collecting data from other subsystems, either automatically because you define the links or the means and ways to read the data from the sources that you want to report against, or some of them, again, might be manually put it together. In other words, you ask someone to export the data in a sales subsystem into a CSV file and email or hand it over or put it in a network drive, and then the guy that will run the reports for the boss will grab that file and then integrate it into the system. Again, it might be a partially manual transfer of data, but you do have this in all companies. And many of these reporting subsystems become really slow. It's very common to see companies that in order to run the monthly reports, it takes them still 1 week, because 80% of the time is resolving how to transfer the data. And because in many of these systems, this is still a manual process. Someone needs to run a batch routine, In the best of the cases, it creates a file that can be read directly by the reporting system. In the worst ones, as I mentioned, it will be some very manual steps to export it to a flat file, to a CSV file, and then transfer it somehow to the reporting system so it can be crunched and put together. So these are the three, in my experience, the three major scenarios where you have this integration of data. Now, why am I bringing this up to case? Because in these processes, you are implicitly, without knowing, doing ETLs, exports, transformations, and loading of data. Next slide, please. So in this integration of data, you have many transformation processes. Now, can be so simple of just having a connector, which means your data, your system, be it the data warehouse, be it the reporting system, or you name it, can directly connect to the source of the data. So in this case, you're just using a connector or something more official like a ODBC or the technology that allows you to connect to that source of the data. And then you are just reading the data off of it. And in the most basic scenario, you're just mapping the data from simple data types, like from an integer to a numeric, or from a float to a decimal, whatever. So you're really not massaging the data. You're just transferring it as much as possible as it is in the source and just mapping it into the simple data types that your system can read directly. So technically speaking, this is not ETL. You are not really transforming the data. You're just taking the data types in its utmost raw data, the rawmost data you can do. So you're just mapping them to be read directly. But even in this simplicity, technically, we can say it's ETL. But in reality, in most of these data transfers, you are really doing ETL, which means you're reading the data, you are staging it in memory or in a temporary data table, transforming it, changing some of the data, mapping to different types, creating subtables. All this massaging is what technically we call ETL. You are extracting data, transforming it, and then finally loading it in the final place. Next slide, please. And now just to finish the boring part is the point with the data subsystems is that most of them that you can have utilities, most of the systems that you can have in a company, they provide you with a very nice set of tools to do this massaging and interfacing of data, but as long as the data is a unique version. In other words, you can have, in this sample on the left side, an homogeneous data subsystem. It means that all the pieces of your interaction of the data are of the same brand and vendor. So in this case, it simplifies things because you are in the same vendor schema databases. So the tools that are provided with the database most likely will help you solve the situation when transferring the data. And this would be the best of the scenarios because then you don't necessarily have to transfer or change the data types. It will be read natively and directly. But this is what we call an homogeneous data system, means all of them are the same type, same vendor, same version. But what we do have in most companies nowadays is the one on the right-hand side, which is a mix and match of any possible vendors and databases. Then that's what we call an heterogeneous data system, because you have not just one vendor or one database, but different types. So this makes it very complicated. So next slide, please, Jan. Now, this is the point. Usually, when you have an heterogeneous system, the tools provided by one of those vendors will not help you because they will only talk to its own brand, to its own type. So in the previous example, you found an Oracle database. They have a pretty good set of tools to extract the data and to load it into Oracle, and very fast, but they work only with Oracle databases. If you need to do the transfer to another type of database, you only have two options. Either you purchase a special created tool that can talk to the other database that allows you to talk from Oracle to SQL Server, let's say, as an example, and these tools are normally expensive, or you do some custom solution. And to us, since we're talking about Delphi and C++ developers, you will create some custom-made program that will do the ETL manually and custom-made by you. So you will use your connectors provided by Delphi or C++ Builder, and then you will read the data manually. You will transfer it in your program and then send it back to the other system you need to transfer it to. So this has been the traditional approach. Can be any programming language. I'm showing just here as an example Object Pascal, which is the one on Delphi. But this is what most of us have done in the past. Now, as more complex and more data intensive transformations come to hand, the more time spent on creating these custom programs, and it becomes a nightmare to keep them all synchronized, and especially with the modern times where data science and all these new trends are promoting creating new tables and new types of data and collecting more every day. So it comes to a point that is barely manageable to keep up with all these custom-made programs just to connect the data. Next slide, please. So last but not least, this is what I wanted to reach into this set of slides is thanks to this new technology provided by FireDAC, you have this one solution that allows you to talk with heterogeneous systems. And it's right there, built in into Delphi and C++. And this is a surprise to me that still many Delphi and C++ developers don't know exactly how to master it. But the great beauty of FireDAC is that, yes, you may know that it can connect to different database systems because it comes with the connectors and the non-visual components to connect to each one of the databases. But few developers know that you can integrate them all and do an ETL across different types of data systems with the built-in features of FireDAC, namely the SQL component, the script component, FireDAC script component. So next slide, please. If you don't know it, this scripting component provided on every FireDAC, even with the professional version, even with the community edition of Delphi and C++ Builder, you have all these commands that are usually used for scripting in those utilities like the one coming from Oracle. Actually, the commands coming in FireDAC are molded almost 80–90% on SQL Plus by Oracle, which was the first great commercial utility that could do this kind of things for scripting databases. So FireDAC took most of those commands and they've been replicated internally. And then it added maybe 2–3 more commands that are specific for interface and a couple more for SQL Server. But they are mostly modeled based on the Oracle SQL Plus utility, which is the de facto standard in most companies for scripting SQL databases. This page shows the first set of commands. Next page, if you mind, Ian, please, shows the other set of commands. I won't go into detail. The whole idea of this brief introduction is just to make you aware that right now in Delphi and C++ Builder, even with the community edition, you have this tool available. You just need to know how to exploit it. I have been doing some presentations in CodeGear and others showing how to do that. Just wanted to remind the audience that this is one of the biggest step-throughs that Embarcadero did when they acquired this technology. So going back to you, Ian.
I was busy answering a question. So, whoa, wait, me? Okay, me. Okay, yes, that was great. I enjoyed the presentations there. We'll talk about the FireDAC batch move in a second. There are some questions, actually. Surprisingly, they're actually quite in-depth questions as well. I think it's because I said, hey, you've got some experts here. It's a free consultancy. I didn't mean quite consultancy. I meant we'll help you out a little bit on online. If we just talk about the questions for a second, let me apparently drag them over here and not cause a problem. One person, it was Esma Johnson. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name properly, but I think I am. He was saying that the Professional Community Edition doesn't include FireDAC drivers for MS SQL, Oracle, MySQL, MariaDB, DB2, etc. That is true. you know, they don't do that. The community edition is designed for kind of lower level use, shall we say, of the product. But that said, the community edition is effectively a professional edition, and there are components out there that you could use. There's my DAC and any DAC and a few others out there, MySQL DAC and some other third-party libraries. Absolute Database works with it as well. If you start talking about accessing things like Oracle servers, I would question how much your use of the product is fitting within the community framework of how much you earn and whether it's you know, hobbyist, which is effectively what it is, or learning. If you're going to learn and you want to learn how to use the kind of more enterprise components, there is a trial version of Delphi, the latest version as well, which will give you all those drivers and all of the FireDAC components. I know I sound a bit like a salesperson for Embarcadero. I really am not. I know I'm an Embarcadero MVP, but you know, we're independent and we do have our own opinions. And believe me, behind the scenes, if we've got something we don't like about Embarcadero, we let them know just the same as anybody else. But you know, if you're connecting to Oracle databases, you're talking about substantial financial investment in Oracle. The same with things like DB2, not so much MySQL and Mariah, I get that, and not so much MS SQL if you're looking at the lower level stuff. But if you're connecting to some of the bigger servers, then are you really using the community edition within the community guidelines? I'm not saying you're not, but I'm just saying that you've probably reached a point where you need to be looking at some other alternatives.
Community editions are still a good thing to get started. And I mean, that's the purpose of the community edition. You can do your personal stuff. You can connect to local databases, even to SQL Server Express Edition, which runs on your local machine. That's possible. And if you really need to go beyond, you can even use the integrated ADO drivers, even though I do not really recommend using them. But as a last resort for community edition, they are available. But and there are external libraries, like you said. So it's a great product for getting started. And yeah, so Oracle in enterprises costs you a fortune, and Delphi Enterprise Edition or license is peanuts compared to that. Yeah.
Yeah, small car versus a Rolls Royce or something like that.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I mean, you know, the community edition is effectively the pro SKU. It's the same product. And so if you've got a third-party library that will work with the professional version of 10.33, because that's what it's based on, then it's going to work with the community edition. You can get trial versions of components, but if you're being paid for your work and you're connecting to an Oracle database, then you know, there's going to be a point at which you're going to probably have to invest in some form of product. But if you're connecting to an Oracle database just for fun, what are you doing? You know, they're very big systems, and I remember back in the day, you know, you in the slides we were talking about the early days of scripting databases, and I remember when PostgreSQL came out, PostgreSQL or however we want to pronounce it, and MySQL were both really quite popular, and still are obviously. But the difference was that MySQL at the time was something like version 3 or 4, 3.5 maybe, and didn't have things like triggers, and it didn't have the same events and stuff like that. PostgreSQL came along, and oh my word, it had absolutely everything. And not only that, the SQL worked differently because the schema is buried amongst this kind of structure that you want to access it. And MySQL hasn't got the same structure. You literally say use this database, and off you go. It's quite a straightforward dialect of SQL, and PostgreSQL was, but it had significant differences to make life more difficult. And along came FireDAC, and you didn't really have to start writing weird things in order for that to work. You coded to the FireDAC components, the interfaces of those, and life got a lot easier. I have to say I don't use FireDAC for MySQL most of the time. I use some third-party libraries because the FireDAC that I've seen has always used that libMariah or libmysql.dll drivers, and some of the programs that I write, the people are not particularly sophisticated and do things like accidentally overwrite driver DLLs and stuff like that. What can you do with them? You know, not lock them down or something.
If it's up to me in the specific project, I'm choosing FireDAC because I know the bits and bytes in it, and I know how it works, and I know it's really performant, and that's why I use FireDAC if possible. But of course, there are specific libraries for probably every single database out there. But it doesn't mean FireDAC is bad or slow because it has to abstract a lot. The architecture of FireDAC is actually quite well designed, so they plug in different drivers and wrap the SQL dialects into that driver and into the driver level. So it's quite nice. Even SQLite works perfectly with FireDAC, so that's fine. And Alf Christopherson just says that he's been using Oracle XE for several years. So that's the free edition of Oracle. But I believe there was a discussion just recently why there is no Oracle driver in the community edition, because Oracle has a free product. So yeah, maybe it's something you should send to the product management. So that's sometimes something we do as well as MVPs. So they might to reconsider the driver that the community edition comes with. And of course,
they publish their email addresses. What can I say?
Right.
They're obviously inviting us to tell them what we think. So you know.
Yeah, right to Marco. I mean, he's probably the best address for that. He's well, the PM. So
yeah, I mean, you know, I will say one thing about Embarcadero. I mean, we're all users of Embarcadero and we're all MVPs, and obviously we, you know, collectively the MVPs believe in the products. That's why we become MVPs. We get picked or chosen to do it because obviously, you know, we can see the benefits from a professional point of view. Doesn't mean to say we don't see the downsides as well. We're not complete fools. You know, there are, like any big organization and like any completely technical system, there are lots of moving parts, and sometimes those moving parts don't move in the right directions. But I will say one thing in Embarcadero's defense, and that is they are very responsive to people going to them and saying, this particular thing here is wrong, and this particular thing here is missing, and they will try and do things about it. It's a big enough organization and it's a big enough engineering product that they're not always going to respond instantly and in the timescales that people want, because that's just the nature of creating a compiler, an IDE, different SKUs. There are some people out there who are customers of Embarcadero who have many thousands of seats, you know, and things like that. And you know, these are the people that they have to make sure that any changes are compatible with, because you know, you're talking about some substantial organizations and my own stuff as well. You know, I mean, there are millions of people clocking in, you know, on times and attendance in the UK based on stuff I've written. If Embarcadero makes a big mistake and I don't notice it, it's going to be a lot of people phoning me up and complaining. So but they are responsive. You know, if you think there's something particularly missing, you can ask. The worst that can happen is they say no, but the best that can happen is they say, yeah, we can do that.
And Sergey Glovolin, sorry if I don't pronounce that correctly, Sergey Golovin.
Sergey Golovin.
Yeah, all right. He's saying that professional and dev art ODAC works pretty well with well, professional, and it's less than buying enterprise. Yeah, it is. And he's saying that the ODAC product of DevArt even had some enhanced functionality over FireDAC. Yeah, sure. I mean, third-party products they need to fight for the market. So if they don't come up with something, they won't be bought. So that's the reason.
Yeah.
It's certainly a premier party or vendor for drivers, but there are more.
Yeah. One person there, Mohit. Yep, I think his name's Mohit. I'm not going to pronounce his surname. I'm sorry about that. Your last name is a little bit too much for my British tongue to trip over. He's just saying, hey, the answers to these questions are taking a long time. We have absolutely no script. We've got some slides that we prepared, but this is deliberately a 2-hour webinar. You guys all knew that, right? The panelists, yeah, 2 hours. It's a 2-hour webinar, and the idea is that we're going to have a conversation rather than specific scripted demos and things to talk about. And we want to answer your questions. So if you have got a question where you think the answer will be long, go ahead and ask it, because now's the time to get those answered. I think there was a couple more comments about the community version. I don't want to labor on the community version. It is what it is. It has been publicly said by, I think, Marco, that there is a new community edition that is planned, but there's nothing to announce at the moment. They will be coming out with a new community edition. That's as much as Marco has said publicly. If I knew any more, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway, and none of us would. But I don't think there's anything specifically that we plan to discuss with that. But the community edition was amazingly popular. A lot of people liked it, but as with any of these things, if you give out a product for free and say you can't do this, you can't do that with it, and put in some restrictions, there are some people that come along and ruin it for everyone, shall we say. And some people were using the community edition beyond the restrictions on it. That's kind of expected. You know, these things are going to happen. How many times do people have products that are shareware, and then people never actually pay the developers, you know, a nominal fee for the use of that product? I'll give you an example of a product to do with ETL that has that happen, and that's Heidi Sql. I just did a blog post about it the other day on blogs.embarcadero.com. Heidi Sql is written in Delphi, and it is very interesting because it doesn't actually use FireDAC behind the scenes. It uses its own library to extract data from MySQL, SQL Server, SQLite. I think PostgreSQL is also in beta as well, and it's polyglottal, so you can connect to a server and say it's a MySQL server and it can work it out. But it does that without FireDAC, which is pretty impressive. It does the kind of things that FireDAC does behind the scenes, so it abstracts out all the SQL, and where there's a variation in the dialect, and it'll do it for you. If you haven't seen Heidi Sql before, I definitely recommend it. I use it quite a lot. But the weird thing about that is that's a project where they have a donate button. It's optional, but I know that the amount of donations they get compared to the amount of downloads they get is minimal. And it's the same thing that the community edition suffers from as well. So whilst everybody wants everybody to have the community edition and do absolutely everything and be free or as cheap as possible, there's also an awful lot of people behind the scenes that are actually trying to write the compiler and be paid to pay their bills by writing the compiler. So, you know, it's business is business. You know, it's just one of those things.
There's actually an interesting question about specific systems to connect to. So we are leaving the area of plain databases like Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, whatever. And there is Konrad Vermeulen asking, has there been any integration libraries between Delphi and AWS warehousing, such as Redshift? Yes. There is actually a third party. They are doing some incredible job, or they have an incredible amount of products. It's CData. CData is a company. I don't even know where they are located, but they are somewhere in the internet. I'm going to provide a link to the question as well, of course. And they provide
cloud.
They are in the cloud, right? And they allow you to connect to almost everything that's sitting somewhere in the cloud. Redshift is just one of the options or systems that they support, and it's let me see if I answered that correctly here. I believe I sent the link to the wrong. No, it's correct. Let me post that here. It's CData. They have a huge amount. They have drivers for Redshift. They have drivers for SAP systems. They have drivers for Salesforce, and even for Microsoft 365.
They do a lot of non-data sources as well.
Right. I mean, everything is data in these
Google
times.
Drive and QuickBooks. Right. They have QuickBooks drivers. They have
exactly.
Drivers. Absolutely.
And they actually abstract that to FireDAX. So everything you get from them looks like a SQL query. So they managed to analyze all the models that these different solution providers have, and they translate it to SQL language. So you can basically do something like select everything from messages if you were connected to Microsoft 365 systems. I had just a project where the customer needed to load emails from their central email server, which is in Microsoft 365. And they ended up just running SQL statements, and it works just fine. You can even send emails by inserting data into these SQL tables. So it's crazy what they are doing. It sounds crazy, but it works. Well, just look into the link that I just sent.
I actually looked at the CData stuff for a thing called SendGrid. You didn't just say that, did you? I was busy focusing on a message there, but they had a CData connector for SendGrid, which is similar to what you were saying, and also Outlook and Gmail, right. And I think what's the other big bulk data system? SurveyMonkey or something random like that. And the weird thing was, I looked at the example. I thought, I wonder how they do this for SendGrid, because I actually had a use for it. I had a TMS web core product of all things for a school, and they wanted to be able to. They booked. It was a marching band, and every year they, at school in America, high school have marching bands. So if you've seen these on the internet, it's a big deal for these kids. And they have a end of school year dance specifically for the marching band. So I wrote a website to book all their tickets, and you could choose a vegetarian meal and chicken and all the rest of it. But of course, the biggest problem was actually making sure that the emails were sent securely, and that the replies that would come back from people were managed properly. And we use SendGrid, which is the public. It's a publicly available system that handles bulk mail, so it avoids the problems of being spammed and manages address lists. So I looked at this, and there was a CData connector for it, so I used that. That's quite interesting. And then someone said, can we use our internal email system, which is based on Exchange, to do this? And I was like, yeah, of course. And I go to look at the example, and I'm like, I've accidentally pulled up the same example. It's the example for the SendGrid system. No, it wasn't. The reason it's the same is because the abstract the interface is so well that the example looks the same whether you are sending it via SendGrid, which is an API-based system, to an Exchange server where you're connecting a direct connection via SMTP, to something bizarre like Google Drive. And like as you said, you pull up SQL records and insert new records, and that's how you send the email. It's an absolutely bizarre way of thinking about it, but actually it really, really does work. And it's not a cheap system, but it's a very effective one.
Actually, I used in another project CData to pull data from Google Drive, basically images that were put onto the Google Drive with some Google form, and I pulled these images and put them onto a Shopify platform. Shopify is one of these e-commerce system where you can build your own shop and have product lists. So even that worked. And there is another, Chris Peters is saying CData is a bit expensive. Well, yes and no, of course. They provide excellent service, and that might cost a bit, but you have a CData license in the Enterprise edition of Delphi. So if you buy Delphi Enterprise, you get a license key for CData, and most of the drivers are included in that license. So the more common ones are accessible just if you have Delphi. So that's a great deal that, in my opinion, that Embarcadero, well, basically was able to make for us. And we have a great insight from David I. He is actually joining our seminar. Hey, David. He's giving some light on who is behind CData. He says many developers will recognize Gent Hito, or Hito, I have no idea how to spell that, founder and president of CData. He has been building an award-winning tools for developers for more than 2 decades. Prior to starting CData, Gent founded N-Software, a leading provider of communication and security components. Yes, I know those. If you need anything secure, IP protocol, whatever, go to N-Software. And it's really used by hundreds of thousands of software engineers around the world. Jen holds a Bachelor in Science, in Computer Science from North Carolina State University. So he's CData is actually a spin-off or whatever of N-Software. So and N-Software has been around quite a while. So really good guys behind the company. Very interesting.
Yeah, N-Software is a company I came across just recently as well, and they are extremely useful. I think that the thing about CData is it's one of these situations where people say, why do you charge so much per hour? In fact, there was a discussion with the Delphi Mystics guys just recently. In fact, Olaf, I think you were on that as well, weren't you? And the discussion was about hourly rates. And there was a big, I won't go into details, but it was really people were saying how much they charge and why per hour. And, you know, you get people come along and say, well, I can get someone that will do it for $20 an hour. And your rate is more than that. Okay, well, go ahead. You can get $20 an hour, and maybe that person will be extremely talented, and maybe they live in a country where $20 an hour is a reasonable living wage for a developer. But the reality is that for a lot of people, particularly if the developer is a contractor, and most MVPs tend to be contractors or run a business, $20 an hour in the United States, and the equivalent in most European countries is not really enough. You know, we have to pay taxes and we have to pay all sorts of other things on top as well, and you know, nice cameras and lights and headphones and internet connections that fast enough. And so our rates are more, and it's the same with CData. They are expensive, and yes, you might want to pick just one of those components and say, well, why can't I just pick this particular one here? But the amount of effort that has gone into developing that thing versus the amount of uptake that there will be for the product, it sets the price that it does. I've always said, and I said this in the Delphi Mystics video, something is only worth exactly as much as someone will pay and no more. So if it to you is valuable enough that it's going to make your life a lot easier, and to do it in a different way would take you forever or not even be possible, then unfortunately you've either got to put up your rate to whoever is down the line from your code, or convince your boss or whoever holds the purse strings that CData is worth it. And my experience, and I have no connection with CData whatsoever, is that it's a great product. If it wasn't, I would either keep quiet about it or tell you it was horrible. and it's not. It's great. So yeah, it's expensive, and a lot of things in life are expensive, but I don't know. It is what it is, isn't it? Okay. Right. What other questions have we got? what about the toolkits integrate with IBM Z series mainframe datasets for migrating processing to, let me see what that is, Intel Linux? The biggest issues I find are lack of libraries and tools to handle datasets. Sorry, it's moving. You see, more questions coming. Handle datasets on Linux like the mainframe does. This software does support generation dataset concepts on Linux, and there's a link to a GitHub wiki. That's from Don O'Brien, which is a name I can say, although it could be O'Brien because it's Irish and with an E in it. What's the panel's feeling on that? Linking to things on Linux. I mean, for me, it depends on whether you're talking about writing an app with FMX Linux and then trying to make your Delphi apps work on Linux. That to me has always been an absolute nightmare recently. But if you're connecting to Linux, well, actually, I do it all the time and I don't really notice any difference. I mean, if it's a MySQL database, I don't really care if it's on Linux or something like that. This is specifically talking about the IBM Z series. Does anybody know what it is? Because I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that. No?
Not really.
No, I think, well, unfortunately, you're probably going to draw a blank on that one, Don. It's not something that any of us seem to know about. If you're just talking about accessing data, really, I mean, it doesn't really matter what it's hosted on most of the time unless you're writing to it. That's when things start to get weird, because as you know from things like GitHub, line endings, you know, are the biggest confusion still. We briefly talked about, you know, encoding. UTF-8, MySQL has a real problem with going from version 5.7 to version 8. And the reason is that version 8 started using a different type of encoding by default. And it was really just to allow things like emoticons and all sorts of bizarre new extended character sets and things, and more languages around the world. You know, there's more and more sophistication comes in and more and more people's languages are adopted. The character sets that used to work in the 1990s don't work now. And MySQL 8 definitely broke a lot of things for me anyway. I don't know about you guys. I think, you know, apart from that, you know, I don't really notice any difference connecting to any, I don't care what the host is as long as it's speaking the right language to me. And that's the whole point.
But the IBM Z series, I know we had all these older drivers when Delphi 4 came out with the connection kit to, I don't remember the name exactly. I never touched that, and yeah, it's hard to give the right answer probably here for me.
Yeah.
There is another question around C data, or it's actually a statement. I have no info about that. James is saying he renewed his red license, and then he was asked by C data to renew the license, and they told him that Embarcadero did not renew the contract with C data. To be honest, I have absolutely no information on that. So do you know anything about C data and the latest licensing with Red Studio?
I don't know. I don't know whether Miguel or Kelvin do. I thought it was still, yeah, I thought it was still available, to be honest.
Yeah, as far as I know, it still comes with Enterprise and Architect editions. But
yeah, I wonder if
there
wasn't like a limited license. Was it like free for a year or something? I thought it was like a permanent. There's different levels. I wonder if C data are talking about him renewing at a higher level than the one that comes with the product. This maybe is something that we need to note down and get back to you on. We're actually going to save all the questions when we finish the session today, and we will try. If some of these questions here, usually when I save these questions, I can get your email. Don't put your email in the questions. but I can usually get back to you and see who the attendees are and things like that. If there's a very specific question like that, we'll post an answer to that, possibly on the Embarcadero blog or possibly on some post like that or something along those lines, because there are going to, as I've said before, we're MVPs, we're basically developers who write code every day in Delphi or C++, and we're not, I don't think any of us are specifically Embarcadero employees. No, we're all shaking our heads. Some of us do some stuff with the Embarcadero, but we don't actually work directly with the Embarcadero. And so there are going to be things that we don't know, and we're going to go and ask product management. And we do have a few secret ways of getting hold of them, maybe normal people don't have. So who knows? We might be able to email them and get an answer that wouldn't normally be brought to their attention. So I think the question there is there some kind of renewal for C data? And we'll have to go in away and check on that. As far as we're aware, it's still ongoing, but maybe there's a change that we're not aware of. Line endings is one thing, but what about time, UTC or not, and UTF Unicode, ASCII versus EBCDIC? I know you spelled that incorrectly, Chris. Okay, so I talk about this for a second because I specialize in time and attendance software and human resources software. And so my days are made miserable by dates and times. And I have the benefit of being a British person who's an American as well. So I typically deal with people in the UK, and they are 6 hours different from my time zone. So I get people wanting to call me at 4 a.m. and being surprised that I won't answer the phone calls, surprisingly. In terms of dates and times, the way that I normally deal with it is currently, because I have different systems that we write to, PostgreSQL has got a very interesting date and time field that has a UTC offset. So when you store the date and time in PostgreSQL, and you use this kind of timestamp with offset thing, you have to use some specific commands to reverse that back out. And if you Google this particular data field type on the internet, you'll find thousands of people having problems with it. It's probably the #1 asked question about Postgres, which is, you know, how do I make the dates work properly? They do have a similar field that they, I think, have introduced in MySQL 8. And I know that there is at some suggestion that there might be a UTC now option in the future, although I can't guarantee that will happen, but it gets asked a lot. And I've heard one of the product managers say that that might be something as well. UTC now would just give you the universal time, coordinated time, date and time. The way I deal with it is I store the date and time as the date and time that it is on the local server system. And I also include a different date and time format that is a non-standard date and time format that's essentially the same as MySQL format. So it's a year, month, date, and then time fields. It's horribly inefficient, but it is actually quite efficient in terms of indexing. But that's because we have very specific problems in time and attendance. For example, you could have someone in the UK who clocks in, you know, for work at 11 o'clock at night, and they work then a night shift. And during the night shift, the date and time shifts because the British summertime savings comes in, or daylight savings, or whatever you want. And all of a sudden, that person has either done 1 hour less or 1 hour more, and we have to cope with that kind of thing in the time and attendance. Likewise, they might clock into a British server, but it's actually the data stored in the United States, and it could be a 6-hour time difference on the local server time. And if they're using a web component to clock in and out, you've got to show them their local time on their little device that's a phone with a web app, and you've got to work out what their local times are. And this is actually, weirdly enough, very few systems deal with this particularly efficiently and particularly well. And if there's going to be a problem, it's nearly always to do with that kind of cross time zone thing. And in the United States, of course, right now I'm in Central Standard Time, so I'm -6 UTC. Olaf, you're somewhere else. I don't think you're in Central Standard Time.
We are +2 because we are in summertime. Yeah.
Right.
UTC
so
Yeah,
there's a difference there.
3 here in Brazil.
Yeah, so -3 in Brazil, and so all of us are at weird times. And I know there was a guy just saying recently, I forget what country he was in, I missed him now, but he said he was going to bed because it was 2 a.m. I think it was Singapore or something like that. I felt very sorry for him, but yeah, it's a problem, and I don't know if any of the others have got some kind of input on the date and time situation. There's room for improvement, shall we say? No, okay. I mean, some of the systems like Postgres, have tried to address this problem with storing a date and time as a UTC with an offset. But again, that's great if you look at what UTC was in November and you're looking at historical data, and now you want the time that it was at that time. There's all sorts of horrendous calculations that go on. I know they've got it wrong because there's so many people that Google it, that there's a problem.
Yeah, that's true. So if you do calculations like these, try to do them or to run them on UTC anyway, and then if you got something, if you really need to know the local time at the specific point in history, well, then translate it to something. But still, I mean, in Europe, we are discussing to basically get rid of winter time, so shifting to summertime all the time. Maybe to have some more fun when it's raining. But anyway, yeah, time is always a thing.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting that's going to happen. Okay, which is you say Europe, but of course UK no longer in Europe. England.
Well, in Europe, but not in the EU.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. European continent. In fact, when people call me European over here, which happens from time to time, and I say thank you very much. Yes, I am European. I feel like it. I'm a US citizen, so I'm a bit weird. I kind of inhabit all sorts of different cultures. But I was actually born in a place called Woolwich, and Woolwich is 1 mile away from Greenwich, where Greenwich Mean Time comes from. There's a big line on the ground in Greenwich, which is the Greenwich Meridian. That's where GMT comes from. And there has been talk of getting rid of the daylight saving times in the UK for many, many years. But nobody seems to know what to do about it because there's so many systems, like a lot of time clocks automatically correct for dates and times based on some calculation that they know when the last Saturday of the relevant month is, and automatically correct for the hour and change over automatically. Not everybody wants that, of course, but that happens. But when the United States has looked at this, several states have said they're going to get rid of daylight savings times. Arizona don't have it. In Arizona, there is no daylight savings time, so their time difference to the rest of the country changes every time everybody else changes, and they're still the same. They're still UTC plus whatever, 5 or whatever. So yeah, I don't think there is a definitive answer to what to do with dates and times, as you said.
There is actually a different question or a different kind of data sources from Vince Cheney. He's asking for recommendations how to extract data from saved web pages. So he's basically asking for HTML interpreters or engines. There is actually a pretty nice HTML library on Delphi. I will have to look up the URL. They parse the whole HTML, and you can basically do whatever you like. But in the end, if you are trying to, access a web page which is made for human eyes and try to process these pages with a machine, this may work or may not, because HTML pages have the tendency to change just overnight without any notice, and that's easy because it's humans reading those pages. And if the login field is now not in the center, but in the upper right corner, it doesn't matter, because the human will recognize the login field and know where to put in the credentials. But the machine, the AI or whatever, needs to analyze that and understand the context and everything. So analyzing HTML to automatically retrieve data from, well, web pages is a dangerous job, in my opinion. So I would try to avoid that under any circumstance, because it will run for a week, for a month, or maybe even for a year, and then the whole thing just breaks because the developers of that web page decided to do something else. And that's when your software will just fail, and you will have you will need to, well, adjust and tune and fix your code over and over again. So if you can, try to find an API that the system provides and connect to that, because those APIs are basically stable and don't bring all these, well, little changes that will make your system break. So yes, there are HTML libraries that allow you to process data from pages, but I really would not recommend to do that.
He also asked in the same question about Excel and Outlook DB. So about the Excel part, you should again use CData. It has a really easy way to make a kind of SQL statement, as Jan said. You just make a select all from your spreadsheet name, and you get the entire table in your data set. And beyond that, there's another component from, I think, TMS that is called FlexCell, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's FlexCell.
Yeah, really fantastic. I use it in a project, and it was really powerful. It enables you to use everything that the Excel helps let you use without the Excel installed. So two options that are pretty fine to deal with Excel, but I don't have any suggestion to deal with the Outlook database. In fact, don't know if anyone here can suggest something.
Yeah, FlexCell, absolutely. The guy behind FlexCell, he's been working on that for, I don't know, 20 years, and I believe he can do everything that Excel can do, and it's completely native. So there is no ActiveX or OLEDB or whatever. It's native Delphi, and it works. It just works. It even works in FMX.
I used it in a Linux server project.
Right.
It was really nice.
The TMS library you're talking about?
Yes, sorry, it's a TMS FlexCell.
Yeah, it's very interesting. This is when we need Holger around, because Holger would have all the answers, I'm sure. You know what he's like. But I did see a nice little demonstration, and it's a remarkable library. Holger does a load of reporting with it. And he says, "Oh, this is a great reporting tool." And I have to say, I was skeptical, but he proved me wrong.
Even that. I mean, there are many people in your organization who they know how to work with Excel. So if you write a tool that extracts the data, the E in the ETL, from the data sources and put it the T in some Excel sheet with a flexer from TMS, and then provide that Excel sheet to the guys in your organization where they know how to deal with Excel, it's probably a great solution. And that's why Holger says it's great for reporting. So yeah, it works in many environments.
Yeah, and I have to say I was very skeptical. I'm like, no, it's just a spreadsheet, right? No, it really.
Yeah, I mean, it's about standards. Excel is a standard for data. People do everything in data, even nonsense stuff. But anyway, if you can put numbers into Excel, well, you're gonna be the hero.
There is a guy I work with who's, shall we say, a little bit old-fashioned about technology, and he always refers to the database. And when I go and look at it, it's an Excel spreadsheet, and I used to be very kind of snooty about it. She was so that's not a database, this is a database, and pull up some great big data store or something like that. But actually the way they use it is a bit like a database, so it's not very good because, you know, people can overwrite lines and columns and things like that. But I used to, in a previous job many years ago, and I'm talking like probably early 90s, probably like 80s, but the used to work for the Rover Car Group back in the day. And I was asked to write a system which managed all their properties, and they owned a lot of property. They owned things like part of St Pancras Station in England and some airports, and just because they'd been around for so long that they'd bought up various parts of land, you know, as they bought up car companies, the car companies had to have bits of land around the country. And so I had this huge inventory of land, and they also had this problem with lots and lots of factories where they wanted to be able to say, oh, this factory here is costing a lot of money on electricity compared to what we were expecting it to cost. And so in a spreadsheet, I kid you not, and it may even been a very early version of Excel, so it must have been early 90s, I'm sure. We wrote a complete what did they call it, an enterprise management system or something like that, and there was 3 of us doing it, but it was all based on macros and in the spreadsheet and stuff like that, and it was very effective. You could drill down and say, oh, someone's left the lights on at night when they're going home, and that's why the electricity bill was, you know, £17,000 more in a quarter, because obviously in some of these factories you're talking about millions of watts of electricity being used for the car manufacturing, but also hundreds and thousands of light bulbs and bizarre things that if they just turned them off, they could actually make a difference. It doesn't matter if you turn off 1 or 2 bulbs, but when you turn off 1 or 2,000 bulbs, then there is actually a big difference. And yeah, spreadsheets, not a big fan of calling them tools, but yeah, they're very
many people do. I mean, it's probably just us developers who think, oh, it's this old thing and it's not worth looking at. But the regular people in the company, they just use it. I mean, it's just a matter of fact.
Well, I saw one of these things where they had these low code programming things, and most of the low code systems, they produce something useful, but not quite the same as a craftsman writing the code. But no, I think we have to say that. But someone has just got GPT-3, which is a machine learning and artificial intelligence system, and they taught it how to write, I forget what programming language it was, but you literally speak to it, and it produces a program. You just say, you know, I'd like a screen that's got 4 buttons on it, an edit box, a label, and I want it to submit and send my email off, and the thing produces a program. So our days are numbered, I think, but hopefully I'll be long gone before that actually happens. But yeah. You mentioned just to go back to a slightly earlier question, we were talking about scraping data off of websites. On blogs.embarcadero.com, there is actually an article about using the Python GUI, which is something that's written in Delphi, and the Python GUI has got some very interesting capabilities for linking to AI, and one of them is a web scraping AI. It's one of the recent articles. I'll have to find it and send the link up, but they actually scrape data off using this AI, and it links to some kind of API for the AI in the background. But it was quite an interesting article. It's Python, so I don't understand everything. There seem to be too many spaces in Python, but yeah, these things are interesting.
I posted the link to the HTML component library to the original question. So it's all native what they did. So, but yes, an AI is certainly the way to go to do that in a more stable way. Statically, just by looking at the third row in the second column of a table, it's dangerous to do that. So
there was an article in there about the Google Cloud. I don't know if you've come across this. There's Google Cloud Machine Learning, I think it's called, or something like that. And there's a lot of articles. I'm kind of involved behind the scenes with some of the blog stuff. And there was some good articles there where they were taking images and using the Google AI to label things in the image. So you could put an image up and it would label something and say, this is a person and they're wearing a bathing suit, which was not just saying it's a person, but this person's wearing a bathing suit. And you could also apply the emotion AI to it as well. So you could say, this is an unhappy person wearing a bathing suit. And that's the kind of data extraction that is going to become more normal, I think, is that it's not just understanding, these kind of digital bits of data that we're looking at, where you run a query and outcomes and dates and times and, postcodes, or zip codes or addresses, but maybe more contextual data. So saying, I am looking at a camera picture of some guys on a webinar, and I can tell which one's bored, which one's happy, which one's talking, and which one is not listening. Obviously there are implications for places like China and some other places that have got an interest in keeping eyes on their civilians and or their population, but also it's useful to know, if you're looking at something where you're trying to understand the intent of something, extracting the data out of things that you wouldn't necessarily have got data in it. If you look at an image, you would never consider that to be data, but actually if that image has got a bunch of things in, like my microphone there, and my headset and my glasses, my spectacles, and perhaps in the background I've got a window or something like that. If we can extract from that image, even if it's a moving image, because if they can do it from a static image, it's only one step away to do extracting data from a moving image, then all of a sudden everything becomes data. Everything.
Right, exactly.
The real world is the data. Now, there have been a few little steps towards that with like the Google glasses. So if we remember, that was a complete disaster. But I think what was wrong there was not the idea of putting the Google Glass together and the Google Lens API, but it was just too early. There were people.
Yeah, it was too early and it was too technical, I guess, and it looked way too much like in everybody was thinking of Skynet or something going on, stuff like that. So Apple is working on some glasses that look more like regular glasses with some AI features in it. And the API you were mentioning is Google's Vision API. I posted the link in the chat, and they have two different editions of it. It's the regular AI Vision API, and that one, is already trained, so it would do exactly what you explained. So it would analyze an image and see, that there's a person on the image and label that person, stuff like that. And they have an ML edition, which means machine learning API, where you can actually train the model. So if you had a factory producing something, you could train the AI to recognize your own products and to see differences in your products, like for quality assurance. So if there are certain black dots or whatever on your product, the AI would be able to recognize that and decide and report this single product is bad or does not meet specifications in some way. So it offers the whole machine learning process, so that you could train the API or the model behind the API. So it's a really powerful API that Google offers there. So certainly worth looking at.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of articles on blogs.embarcadero.com. If you go there within the last week or 2 weeks, so there's been 3 or 4, and I know there's some more planned as well, that are linking Delphi programs with Delphi code and repos, because I've got some of them stored on my GitHub, but repos to working code to do things like extracting data and web scraping images and labeling things like, like I said, like the bathing suit and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a push going on at Embarcadero at the moment to kind of link up to those things. It's partly why we're talking about ETL now, of course. So I think we've covered a lot of the questions and answers. Let's have a look. Loading blobs from a file system, i.e. MPEGs and NTF, into a database, or moving them from one database to another. Who's got some answers on that one, Miguel or Kelvin?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, a really interesting question, because he probably will be dealing with big files, I guess. So I think the main suggestion or main consideration is to deal with block storage or blocks of memories. This kind of. I think my baby isn't liking my answer. isn't.
It's usually my dog, so it's much better to have your baby.
So I suggest to implement a kind of, remember the old times. Oh, I'm talking my age, I guess. But remember when we have those download managers where you could pause and resume, this kind of things. So something like that, where he could get part of the binary and do this repeatedly until the end. I think that's the main point I'd suggest. There's no special consideration, assuming that it's dealing with big files and binary files, of course. I don't know if Miguel had something to add. Please feel free.
Yes, thanks, Oliver. I have some insights because we are going into the corner cases of dealing with ETL. Because at some point, dealing with standard types, being numeric, dates, text, strings, it's like a pretty standard. Almost any modern tool can handle them nicely. You might have to go into specialty tools like our audience that has been talking about EBD from IBM or those special cases. Although what I have been replying to them is FireDAC will not restrict you at all. Why? Because FireDAC is on top of Delphi, which for a long time is already Unicode. So FireDAC itself, the components and the scriptings will not limit you. It will be the base database. When you are scripting, because the core point of this discussion is when you are doing ETL, which to me means 90% of the time you are scripting or doing some local, the local query of FireDAC. So in the local one, you are depending on the connector that you are, the database that you are connecting to. And if you're scripting, even more, meaning you're scripting over some staging database. I'll call it staging because in most ETL processes, you're querying from many data sources, but you need some one of them to be your staging one, the one you are compiling into or assembling into or aggregating into to then finally send it over to either a warehouse or whatever. The staging database can be your own warehouse database, but you never do it directly on the master table. You do it again in a staging table. My point being is that if your database supports these code pages, code variations, and special character codings, FireDAC will not limit you. FireDAC is ready. So the limitation will come from the database that you choose to do the staging against. And another current case, has always been blob files management. When you are dealing with a single vendor, like purely Oracle, which I show in my slides, you are in an homogeneous scenario, you don't have an issue. You can even query remotely with some limitations because in Oracle, you need specific commands to insert and query the blob files remotely. So taking care of that, being with the same vendor is not an issue. But guess what? Most of our users here don't know one thing that I was surprised to find out with FireDuck. The way the batch move component is implemented, it natively handles blob files. So you don't need to care about any of these things. Since the FireDuck scripting engine will read raw text files when you are staging, and actually this is most of what FireDuck was designed to be very simple. So when you are staging, when you're extracting the data and importing in intermediate format, it exports to text files. And if you are having some blob files in it, it will export in hexadecimal code embedded within it, which is great. Now, there's a catch, because everything is being exported in the same temporary or staging text files. You must be careful to do it in small batches. You will not export a huge database full of blob files. Otherwise, you can create a lot of troubles. Namely, you will have huge files being exported, blah, blah, blah. Another issue is, yes, there is a performance hit because you're dealing with text files as your intermediate process. Yes. And actually, in one of my projects I wanted to show recently, having finished, is do some improvements on the FireDuck engines and the scripting. So you could have this staging temporary database purely in memory, like a combining the local SQL technology with the scripting ability. So you don't need to force to create external text files for interchanging the data. But anyhow, my point is, my take is that if you use FireDuck to exchange blob files that are already loaded in your database, FireDuck is very seamless. And this is unlike some other tools that will clearly say the export to text will not take the blob files. So some of those utilities clearly mentioned. So you need to use, like in case of Oracle, they have a specific command for scripting to load blob files, and it's very well documented. So Oracle developers that are using, they know it, that you need to treat them differently. But if you use FireDuck with temporary files, text files for exchanging data, you don't need to care about it. But you do need to care about being conscious of this issue that you are creating, potentially creating very big text files.
Yeah, and I think the point about scripting is interesting there, because just before we were going to go on to this webinar, I had a guy called David Cornelius. I can't remember if David's an MVP or not, but he's a Delphi guy, and he happened to talk about expressions in live bindings, and talking about the context of doing live bindings with FireDuck. And I'm going to put the link up. In fact, let's see if I can tear this off and carry this across to my other monitor. Yeah, there you go. You should be able to see that. I'm not sure, but it's David Cornelius. Live Bindings Beyond is his GitHub repo. I'll just paste that into the link there. I've also put some links to the Embarcadero blogs about the Google Cloud machine learning API we were talking about, because that's kind of an adjunct to what we're talking about, is getting data out of images and extracting meaning from, if you haven't got enough data, why not create some more from images? Let's just make the whole world into one great big database through machine learning. But David Cornelius, he's gathered together some of the things that you can put into live bindings, which are expressions. And I have to say, I didn't know really too much about expressions until I saw a blog by Marco Cantu about it, that in the live bindings you can put some quite complicated expressions to do some automatic conversion. I'm not a massive fan of live bindings. I said this before to Serena, I think, or someone like that, when they were trying to show me live bindings. I'm like, this reminds me of the days when you used to have Visual Basic with this data source and data field link, and which is great until something changes. You've just created a direct link between your data and the UI, which I don't like. I like to separate, obviously, the business logic from the user interface as much as possible, and have a controller and model view model type arrangement. So in some ways, live bindings is makes me a little bit nervous. But actually, the more you look at live bindings, the more you realize it's not a direct link like that. It's just a kind of abstraction of the data on top of the abstraction. But this shows you some of the things you can put into the live bindings expressions, so that you can manipulate your data. So you pull it out of your database, or pull it out of your data source, or pull it out of your C data source, or however you're using FireDAC or whatever other way to do the data bindings. And then you can put one of these expressions into here, or multiples of those expressions, and manipulate the data. Everybody understands about things like display formats. You know, oh, well, I'll have the display format for a date and time field, or I'll have a telephone number displayed in a particular way. But this allows you to go far deeper into that. For example, picking a string from a JSON value automatically. That is actually very useful. Obviously not so great when someone goes and changes the JSON format, and then you've got to work out where in your program this particular thing is that's retrieving the data and doing it incorrectly. And if you don't know there's live bindings, I challenge you to give it to a novice Delphi programmer and let him find out, or her find out, where the problem is. But when you use live bindings and use these kind of expressions, they're actually extremely powerful, and it's just one of those things to do with extract, transform, and load, I suppose.
These live bindings are really powerful, and what this Cornelius guy does is he I didn't know that library, but he apparently creates custom functions that can be, well, injected into live bindings into the expression engine. And Marco had a blog on the expression engine inside of live bindings, which can be used just as an expression engine without any intent of doing live bindings. But live bindings still suffer from the performance issues that they had in the very beginning. They were, well, relatively slow. They improved that, so it's not that bad anymore, and it's really useful. And they still suffer from the fact that the documentation is a little bit spread all over the cloud. It's some parts are in the DocWiki, of course, but some very important information that you don't find in the DocWiki is spread over several blog entries from various persons. So that's probably the case why, well, not only you still find it a little bit, well, spooky to work with those. And the third part, which is still a problem in my opinion, is the UI. The UI, if you use it in a way that in a real world app, not just the whole world with two fields and something, it gets cluttered. It's really hard to make up the UI. I'm not talking about the UI of your application. The UI where you set up the live bindings, it's introducing new fields all over the place, and you spend most of the time sorting all the connections and the fields in the UI, and that's a little bit problematic in my eyes.
I absolutely agree, and I think people recognize that there's some work needed on that UI. And for me, I have a philosophical problem with it, which is the way that it should surface it more obviously. I think you should open your app, and you should be able to see there are live bindings here, and these are the fields that have got these live bindings on. These are the controls that are bound, and there should be somewhere, I don't know how, because luckily I don't have to solve those problems. It's some poor person at Embarcadero's problem to work that out. I'm not saying that I would have a better way of visualizing it, but you know, for me, live bindings would be a lot more usable if I could open a form that I've never worked on before, because you know I sometimes work on projects I've never even touched, and go, so that particular control there has got a live binding. It should be absolutely blindingly obvious to me. So when someone says, can you fix a bug in this particular control here that's showing some bizarre data, I always forget to look and go, did they use live bindings? Yes, they did. And there it is. And oh, it's this. And with this expression engine, which I think is a great thing, I've put the link to Marco's blog article in there, but it is just one of those things where you're going to start to bury some of the functionality unless that user interface starts to bring it more to the fore and make it more obvious for people. Because as developers, you know, there's a really great book by a guy called Krug called "Don't Make Me Think." And it's a great book, and I think it's Krug, Steve Krug, I think his name, and it's all about you know, part of my emphasis on life is design. In fact, if I minimize my desktop, there is a picture of you know, the world's greatest designer with his 10 points of good design, which is, you know, good design is innovative, etc., etc. He's a very smart guy, but it's absolutely true that you know, Steve Krug says people should not have to think about a user interface. Going to people and complaining and say the users are stupid, they're using it wrong. How many times you get a user saying, "Oh my God, I just can't use this program because I'm not good enough, I'm not clever enough, or I'm not very technical." And I always say to them as a designer, no, you should not have to be technical. There are some things, you know, like if you're a radiologist looking at x-rays or something, there's going to be some technical knowledge required to use some of those tools. But on basic business programs, particularly things that are showing just databases information, the fault is with the designer, the fault is with the developer. If the customer comes back and says they're too stupid to use your program, unless they are clinically useless, which does happen, there are some out there, but majority of people of average intelligence should be able to use your program. And if they can't use it and they think that they're not technical enough, make it work for them, because that's the secret to good design. Is good, you know, don't make me think. And the problem with live bindings is I'm a very experienced developer. That's not me showing off about it, it's a fact. I've been doing it for 38 years and lots of programs out there, and I'm an MVP, so I get stretched from my knowledge quite a lot to make me better at what I do by people asking me questions. But even I am not confident in data bindings, as you said, Olaf, because it's the user interface, I think, doesn't really lend itself to being more obvious and something that you should obviously go, hey, this would be a good way of converting the data without writing lots of code. Because the less code you write, the fewer lines of code you write, the better it is for everybody. I think. You know, feel free to agree with me, guys. What do you think? But everybody seems to be nodding their head, so I guess I hit the right chord there. Okay, we've only got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I found another question or suggestion actually. What about memory tables? So yes, memory tables are great. They are. There is of course the grandfather of everything coming from the early 90s, which is the client data set. This little beast we probably all know, written in C++, I believe, and that's the reason why you won't find the source code for it in Delphi. It's a great memory table. Yes, it can do a lot, but there is a more modern grandchild, which is Fireduck's TFD mem table. It's super fast. It's very easy to use, in my opinion, much easier to use than the client dataset. Even though client dataset has some very specific superpowers like XML processing in some very specific ways, and well, yeah.
Well, Kim, the KBM mem table, is that the one you're talking about?
Of course.
Like Kim
those two tables. Right. Yeah. Yes, FD mem table is even in the community edition. Client dataset is, I believe, not in the community edition because it belongs to the enterprise edition. And well, of course, there are third parties, and I believe Kim's memory table is one of the well-known ones. So yeah, there is a good selection of components here. They are all relatively fast, so if you just need to pull some data, pre-process it in memory, it's the way to go. So don't put your data in arrays and lists and whatever. If you already have queries and tables that you are looking at, just transfer the data into a memory table like a Firedax or Kim Madsen's KBM table. Mem table,
yeah,
right.
Actually, the guy that asked that question is someone I actually know, Peter Edwards. Hello, Peter. I've actually written code for him, so there you go. But he has quite a specific. I assume his business hasn't changed. I've lived over here for quite a long time now, and maybe his business has changed. But he did have some accounting stuff that he did, and he processes a lot of. I wrote a little image processing tool, I think, for him and things like that. But the thing about mem tables are, it starts to get tricky when you talk about mobile applications, because the thing about a mobile application is that there are constraints on the memory. And the libraries like SQLite on things like iOS and Android are highly optimized, and they share system resources. So there is a kind of use case for it, which I personally use mem tables for all sorts of caching, because I think do it that way.
I would even go as far as don't use mem tables on mobile devices. Because what could happen there, they just turn off power, or the operating system says, oh, your application is not worth living on. So the operating system pulls a plug, and your data is lost, and your users get angry. Like you said, SQLite on mobile devices and on desktop devices, whatever you want.
Yeah, Android in particular will just dump your application, and if it thinks you haven't done anything for long enough, it'll actually put your application to sleep, and then eventually it'll just cut off all the permissions of the new version of Android. iOS is the same. iOS is a very harsh environment for an application, you know, particularly when you're processing data, because you're talking about you know, data that you don't have to just think about how you're actually managing the data inside the app within that operating system environment, but also the problem is that you don't want to be using people's data plans. It's okay in the United States and Europe, where a lot of us have, you know, unlimited data plans, and life is sweet and you don't care how much data you use. But I'm sure Brazil, I know, is one of these countries that have a less uptake on unlimited plans. Am I right in saying that, Kelvin, on data? And I know that you know, some of the other countries, like I have a guy that I work with in Algeria. He has an internet connection that is just flaky by design. That's because of the way the government works, and so that poses its own challenges for data in general, because if you're expecting cloud data, you can't get the cloud data if there's no connection. And and if you do get the cloud data and the person's paying by the kilobyte, you know, your little refresh is going to go chink, and their data plan is just going to suck itself down into the ground very quickly, and you're going to become very unpopular. But there you go. We are actually coming to the end of our 2 hours, which is quite amazing, really. I think the time always goes quicker than I was expecting.
Yeah, since we're focusing on answering most of the questions from the audience, just before we go, unfortunately, I wanted to show our live demo of how the scripting component works. From the questions I have been answering, I think I should have focused more on showing examples. Still, many of our audience don't know how you can use the scripting component of FireDAC. And there's a little confusion I just wanted to clarify. The scripting component of FireDAC, when you're exchanging between different database engines, since they cannot talk directly to each other, then the mechanism that it uses to export the data is text files. The beauty of it is that the original developer took care of handling every possible data type without special handling. That's why blobs are handled implicitly without you having to do any special action. You just export it to the text file and then switch to the new database engine that you need to import it into. Then you take it in. Everything is being taken care of by the FireDAC internal scripting component. That's great. But as I mentioned, the only catch is that when you're dealing with huge amounts of data, of course, there is a performance hit because you are exchanging out to text files. And as I mentioned, you do have memory tables. but the memory tables, you cannot reference them in a script yet. So as I mentioned, that is a personal project I've been trying to take over. And I just want to see devise a way that you can integrate the memory tables inside the scripting engine. Then effectively getting rid of the text files as your staging interchange format. And then possibly, if your memory is good, which nowadays all computers have more than 4 gigs worth of memory or more, then it should be more than enough to eliminate that key issue about performance when dealing with huge amounts of data.
Sorry, my dog was just bothering me just at the wrong moment, so I thought I better pick him up, otherwise he's going to scream at everybody. He does this quite a lot. Yeah, so I think Miguel, what you're really talking about here is it sounds like there would be an opportunity to do some kind of webinar on this kind of stuff, like specifically showing live techniques. I think today it's intended to be a discussion. And by the way, I want to thank everybody that said, hey, great session. You put enough programmers together, we've always got something to talk about. And hopefully, our combined 100 and something years of experience of developing is useful to people. We try to, I always say this, we may be MVPs, but we are just developers at the end of the day. What we do is we write code. And I get up every day and I am very, very happy that I decided to become a software developer because I love what I do. And it's not difficult to be enthusiastic about the product because I believe that Delphi is the secret to, making me productive. I think I've been a COBOL programmer and a C programmer, so I know about other languages. Don't ever want to be a COBOL programmer. Trust me, it takes your soul and sucks it out of you. When I first started writing COBOL code, we had to write it on coding sheets on pieces of paper with a pen, and someone else typed the program in. It was very tedious way to earn a living. But that was in the 80s, and it's all gone now. But I want to thank everybody who's come along. I think we've someone saying, "Hey, I liked COBOL." Now we know how old you are. If you liked COBOL, you must be as old as I am. I want to thank the guys that have been here today. Miguel, thanks very much for giving us the insights he did, and also doing more slides than all of us. The rest of us just said, hey, we'll just talk. And Kelvin as well, it's been very good. I know, I apologize that sometimes we don't evenly get to everybody involved in the discussion, but it's just the way these things go. But I think everybody brings something to the table. Olaf, of course, thank you very much as well. And thank you from me as well. Jim will be back soon. He's only temporarily unavailable. Don't worry, it won't always be me. Jim is around. I promise I did not stop the webinar. Someone else did that, and I think it might have been Jim at the other end. But there will be a recording for the people that have asked. So there will be a replay, and we will also put up the slides. And I'm going to keep a track of the questions as well. And we'll try and address some of these questions some way. It may be on the blog or something like that, which is a kind of our favorite way of collectively talking about it. Or I'll tweet them out on Twitter or get Embarcadero to tweet them out, and we can go from there. But I appreciate everybody saying thank you and all the rest of it. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming. And we'll see you, I think, next Wednesday. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the discussion is, but I'm sure you'll get plenty of emails about it. So from here in Dallas, goodbye, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
All right.
folks.
Goodbye. Have a great night, everybody.